At 7 p.m., Sylvie was brushing her teeth when she heard a man shouting and crying outside the bathroom door. She opened the door and saw nothing. Agitated, she went to set down her toothbrush when something bammed on the door. The toothbrush fell in the toilet. Sylvie lived alone. She left the bathroom and checked the house. Every door was bolted, every window locked. She was standing outside the bathroom when she heard it again. She watched the door rattle under the bam, bam, bams of invisible fists, listened as an accented male voice screamed in the empty air. The screaming and bams stopped by 7:30. Sylvie tried to reassure herself that she'd imagined the whole thing, that this couldn't be real. She drank a bottle of wine, watched something stupid, and forgot about the apparition by the time she woke up. Sylvie recalled the incident only when at 7 p.m. the next night, the screaming, pounding, and an East Coast accent pleading for release, "Oh God, please release!" began anew. A dread filled her, but the kind reserved for bedbugs and UTIs. Sylvie had a hazy life infestation, or as folks used to call it, a haunting. Like lightning, earthquakes, and demonic possession, data-driven research had again clarified the supernatural into the rote. After the advances in consciousness science of the 2030s, the work of Gertrude and Solomon Grinshaw at the University of Miami, Ohio, most problems could be solved with a kit from the store. The greatest triumph of science into the paranormal was the simplest, the hazy life diagram. The diagram, shaped like a malformed Indiana, determined, with a high degree of probability, the causes of emergent, errant, or hazy life. Those 5 columns, 12 rows, and 40-some-odd squares joined the pantheon of other irregular silhouettes that represented universal truths. The checkerboard of the periodic table, the fat bulge of the nation-state, the infinite shadow of pi. It was clear Sylvie had an infestation, though not especially violent, only shakily visible and restricted by time. At worst, it would be a chore. She put it off for a week. Sylvie didn't invite people over. She went out. On Thursday, she staggered home from an early happy hour and opened her door, where a 5'7" Italian man greeted her. He stood in the foyer, but cast no shadow. He grinned wide with just his lips, said the words, "white wine," then collapsed. He screamed like a drunk Red Sox fan, bamming his fists on the floor, then distorted painfully into nothing like a tuning radio. On Friday, Sylvie drove to Home Depot. She bought a kit. It was in the checkout lane. The Grinshaw siblings' Hazy Life Erratic Kit provided the following: a matchbox of 200 dusty red testing strips, a laminated Hazy Life diagram the size of a placemat, a Hazy Life Beginner's workbook, and interference gels, a dispersing agent that would eradicate most common hazy lives. Sylvie examined all the kit components. She had never used one before, but it was familiar enough. Her uncle used to work as an exterminator, mostly roaches and errant psychic residues. He didn't work much anymore. Sylvie sniffed the gel, which looked like urine-colored aloe. It smelled like hot fish. The next night at 7 p.m., Sylvie stayed home. In each room of the house, she laid a testing strip at the square center of the floor. This time, the Hazy Life appeared in the kitchen. Though she could not see anything save for flickers in the air like radiating heat, she heard the East Coast accent. Massachusetts? The thuds of a heavy body flopping in agony, the bams of a pounding fist. Before her eyes, while the disturbance disturbed, the testing strip turned from dusty red to a luminescent green. In her workbook, she noted the location, time, and strip color in the provided table. Sylvie compared the test strip with the laminated placemat. The 5 columns in the Hazy Life diagram were divided by the testing strip colors: 3 red, 1 black, 1 green. Red had the most available boxes, as it meant a null result, the most common explanations following in each descending square: house settling, cats, air draft, cats. Black had the second most squares, but the easier solutions, the kind you could solve overnight with a dispersing gel. Green had but a short list of potential squares with corresponding rows, but none were easy. These were the squares the next 30 pages of the workbook were reserved for. Sylvie groaned. This would take weeks. Sylvie began filling in the first massive table in the green workbook pages. She marked the times for the next 2 weeks of each appearance, which was a true chore. She had to cancel dinners and couldn't see her cousin when she flew in 1 week for work. "Sorry, Grace," she had to tell the cousin. "I have an infestation." Her cousin thought she meant ants, and Sylvie told her the embarrassing truth. "A haunting? That sucks. Mom had one at the farm, but it turned out to be cats, thank God. Did you call Uncle Gruder?" Grace asked. "No," Sylvie spoke harshly. "You should call Uncle Gruder," Grace said. He doesn't get out much." "Then why don't you call him?" Grace ended the call soon after, and Sylvie regretted snapping at her like that. The times marked in the workbook eventually showed enough of a pattern to cross off 3 of the potential squares: cell tower interference, Civil War memory loop, and former resident psychic tantrum. The appearances heated the national and even local calendars. Though the screaming and banging started at 7 p.m. most nights, it skipped weekends, and on big enough holidays, it didn't happen at all. There was no apparition on Memorial Day. It also skipped the opening night of the Olympics. For the remaining squares, Sylvie had to take measurements. Syncing a phone app with her location, she charted the exact spot of each appearance for the next 2 weeks and found that though the apparition shifted between rooms, it did so along a straight line. This crossed off 2 more squares: vestigial construction trauma and self-perpetuating psychic residue. It was not a problem with her house, nor with her. This left 1 square, and it was the only square she did not want. Her infestation, the kit determined, was a nostalgic apparition. Out of all the squares in the Hazy life diagram, only this one had the following postscript: "Call exterminator." "You fucker!" Sylvie told the Hazy life diagram. She tried to tear it, but it was laminated. "You stupid motherfucker!" Sylvie called Uncle Gruder at Grandma's house, where he had lived since Grandpa died. Grandpa didn't like Gruder, though Mom never said more than that. Grandma answered the phone and was hurt when Sylvie said she was calling for Gruder. "Him? Why would you want to talk to him?" Gruder, though 65 years old, spoke into the phone like it was his first time. It sounded like he held the phone receiver inside his mouth, saliva smacking between each syllable. "Sylvie, oh my sweet little sweet Sylvie, sweet," he cooed. "Uncle Gruder never gets phone calls. No, no, no. Not this Uncle Sweet, little sweet. He giggled. "Tell Uncle Grood why you called, please." She could hear him wink over the phone. "I have an infestation," she said. "Oh, honey, buy a little kit. He tee-hee-heed. "I did, Uncle Gruder." She had always refused to call him by the gross, repetitious nicknames he gave himself and everything around. Grood, meat, milk. It said I needed an exterminator. Oh my. He smacked, and went on talking, but she couldn't bear to listen to the man. She put the phone down and only picked it up a minute later to arrange when the taxi would pick him up the next evening. Uncle Gruder was coming over. The next day at 6 p.m., Gruder made a pathetic tip-tip-tap knock on Sylvie's front door. "Oh, Sylvie, sweet, sticky glue. He giggled. She sighed and opened the door. Uncle Gruder had a bone problem or some kind of deficiency that hobbled him to 4.5 feet tall. He bulged, though, like a much larger person was crammed inside him, weighing down his pelvis, crooking his legs like a cowboy, sloping his shoulders and curling his spine into a candy cane. "Can you give me a back rub, pretty please?" "What?" She hadn't even said hello yet. He slumped to the floor, laying on his belly and writhing. Everywhere his arms or legs flailed, he smeared with grease, as if his coat, plaid wool pants, and orthopedic shoes were coated in Vaseline. "My back, it hurts. Oh, help an Unky Good, please." Uncle Gruder took measurements of each room while Sylvie kept washing her hands, unable to remove his greasy residue. When she came to the kitchen, she found the workbook she had spent weeks carefully completing shoved into the trash. "You threw away my workbook," she accused. "Oh, little Mimi," he squeaked with his diminutive vocal cords. She began to pull the book out, but found it slick with foul ointment. "This is my house, Uncle Gruder. You have to respect me," she tried to discipline. He wasn't listening. "We don't need a workbook," he said, smearing a kitchen wall with his palms. He knocked a photo of her mother off the wall and the glass broke. "Okay," he squeaked. Unky, it's done. Done? Done here," he winked. "You need to drive me to the others." Others? And Uncle Gruder just laughed. It was the happiest he had been in years. Gruder rode in the passenger seat of Sylvie's Corolla like a sick dog. He slid on the seat at every stoplight, and twice got so scared he kicked the dash, scuffing the glove compartment with his dirty white orthopedics. He wouldn't tell her where they were going, and she wondered if he actually knew. He blurted each direction the moment it was needed. "Right! And here! And stop!" Gruder squealed like he was ready to throw up. Sylvie skidded to a stop on the shoulder of a busy freeway. At once, Gruder opened the door, ripped off his seatbelt, and ran into traffic. "Uncle Gruder!" Sylvie cried. Cars honked, each a howling blur. Yet, when she looked, Gruder was already across, waiting for her at the door of the Bethlehem Retirement Community. Sylvie parked the car and raced to follow Gruder inside. She walked in to Gruder arguing with a nurse. "Calm down or I will call the police," the nurse shouted. No, he screamed. "Gruder!" Sylvie shouted, and the nurse turned in relief. Gruder went silent at once. "Gruder, what are you doing?" "We have to see the 7 p.m. activity, and we have to—" he began, but the nurse cut him off, speaking as though he wasn't there. "We caught him trying to pull a fire extinguisher off the wall." "Gruder!" Sylvie cried. "What is wrong with you?" "I take it he's yours?" the nurse asked. "Unfortunately, yes," Sylvie scowled. She responded like she was his mother. "Jesus Christ, I'm sorry. He's always such a fucking nuisance," she said. She noticed a pained look in Gruder's eyes. "I hope he didn't damage anything." "No, not yet," the nurse sighed and returned to her station. She spoke from the other side of the glass. "He isn't a resident already, is he? Do you want a tour?" We can show ourselves, thanks," Sylvie replied. Gruder was for once quiet, submissive. Sylvie had never disciplined him, yelled at him. He was her uncle, after all. His bug-like eyes were turned to his shoes, his crooked hands wringing. His cheeks were wet. Sylvie checked her phone. "It's almost 7, she said. "Let's get this over with." The residents gathered in the recreation room after dinner. The TV played a commercial, and small groups talked at round tables. Gruder refused to stand by Sylvie. He strolled around. He asked a larger table of residents what they were talking about, but they wouldn't speak to the strange man. Sylvie wondered if, before her, anyone had ever called her grandma's house and asked for Gruder. At 7, as far as Sylvie could tell, nothing changed. Although a cooking show from the 1990s started, folks turned their heads to watch. Gruder clicked his tongue to himself, studied the ceiling, and then announced, "We're leaving!" He walked in his lopsided shuffle at once, and Sylvie struggled to catch up. At the glass doors, he banged and banged until the nurse buzzed him out, and when Sylvie walked by, the woman gave her a foul glare. The next time Gruder told Sylvie to stop the car, it was with a dejected sigh, not the excitable outburst of before. "Stop here," he said. "Okay." Gruder's paw of a hand pointed weakly out the window to a sign reading Golden Crust Retirement and the grid of buildings within. "Let's get this over with," he said, forcing his voice so it was lower, dragging uncomfortably through his throat. Inside, there were no residents in the halls, no nurses in sight. The woman at the counter was in her 70s, bright and alert, hair pinned sharply. "Can I help you two?" she asked as they entered. "What is your cable package?" the uncle barked. "Let me see," the receptionist said. While the woman left, Gruder sat down on the ground before the reception window, disappearing under the protruding Formica counter. He banged his head against the wall. "Gruder," Sylvie frowned, "please keep it together." "Don't talk to me," he pouted. "Here's the cable package," the woman told Sylvie, passing over a laminated channel list. "Every apartment gets the same. Can we walk around?" "Yes, of course." Sylvie followed Gruder as he limped down the hall. "I didn't mean to yell at you," she said. "Shh," he hissed. "Please don't be mad," she said. I mean it. I really... Shh. Sylvie was about to yell at the man again. What right did he have to deny her apology? She was sorry. It wasn't her fault he was a sensitive little freak. But then she heard a familiar East Coast accent.
"Yeah, baby, we'll splash some red wine in there, swish, and add a bam."
Then a long-dead studio audience cheered. It was the same voice as the apparition, except not screaming, pleading for death. She looked at Gruder with shock. He was still doing his job, this whole time. They walked down the halls and heard the same voice shouting in every other room. It was a cooking show. Sylvie didn't need to see the last retirement home to know it was the exact same program playing, delighting so many old folks. After one lap around, they went back to the parking lot, and Gruder made Sylvie drive him to Grandma's. "Are you still mad at me?" she asked. He huffed. "Don't worry about your infestation. I'll take care of it." "Come on, Unky Grood," she said, but her heart wasn't in it. At the Grandma's driveway, Gruder got out, walked to the door, and did not turn back. The next night at 7 p.m., Sylvie's house was silent. At 7:05, she walked around the perimeter of each room, waving one of the red test strips, but saw no disturbance, heard no sound. The strip stayed red. She went online and found the listing for the cable channel. She didn't know this kind of stuff still existed. Live TV, cable, TV guides, and she reflected they did, just in retirement homes. Aging Gen Xers and millennials, torn apart by dementia and vape cancer, rotting away in obsolete nostalgia. She read up on the man who had been haunting her home. Emeril Lagasse, a television chef, still alive too. That didn't matter, really, so much as the minds watching his program united in their memories. She pieced it together. The line that went through her house, along which Emeril had appeared every night his reruns played, stretched between the two retirement homes. Life, as the Hazy life diagram anticipated, wanted to happen, even if half-formed and painful. 20 or 30 minds contemplating the same being was enough to stir it into existence, in this case, in her home. She wondered if she should have filmed it, sent it to the cartoonishly Italian chef, but doubted he would appreciate seeing himself, in any form, in such agony. The next night she stayed home one more time to be sure, and by 7:30 rejoiced to herself. Her house was finally clean. She called friends. A coworker joined her to watch a John Cusack movie. They ate delivery. Part of Sylvie wondered what Gruder had done to fix the problem. Part of her wondered if he was responsible at all, if it hadn't just faded away. At work, just after lunch, Sylvie's mom called her. This was rare, especially during work hours, and Sylvie felt each vibration with a certain kind of dread she last felt when her father died. She answered. Sylvie's mom asked if she had heard from Uncle Gruder. Sylvie didn't say anything as her mother explained. "I spoke with Grandma, and, well, apparently he just took off. She doesn't know when. She just knows when she came to tell Gruder the chili was ready, he wasn't in his little cabinet." "Little cabinet?" Sylvie asked. "Yes. You don't know about that? He only feels comfortable in there. You know they used to keep him in a cage?" "What?" "Uncle Gruder! This was back in the 80s almost. Yeah, Grandpa, you're lucky you never met him. Well, he got tired of taking care of Gruder. He couldn't speak yet, Gruder, 8 years old, but you still couldn't talk.
and he'd throw these tantrums. Well, Grandpa didn't like it. He drove Gruder off one day, and I didn't see him again for 2 years.
You never told me this,
No,
the mother said.
no, I didn't. Grandpa left him with the state. We weren't allowed to write him. Well, we found out later what was going on, of course. They shut that place down years later when all the abuse stories came out. Grandma saw the marks on his thighs. They'd whip him down there, to hide it. And, well, we took him right out. Dad had died by then, so he couldn't say anything.
The mother began to cry.
I'm sorry. He still talks like he did back then. Those cute little phrases. It has made everyone laugh after everything he'd been through. Our little baby, our baby Gruder, little baby, little sweet Gruder, little baby.
A police report was filed. Hospitals were called, but Gruder did not show up. Neither did the apparition, and Sylvie thought she knew why. Sylvie drove to the retirement home the next morning. When she entered the Bethlehem retirement community, the nurse from the other night saw her at once and stomped over, fists clenched. "You didn't give us a phone number," she accused. "No name, no address. We've been watching him all this time. Took your sweet time, huh?" The nurse guided Sylvie around the hall and down a set of stairs. Gruder was in a small room, a closet really, and sedated by God knows what. "He broke the TV," she said. Sylvie nodded. "Took a fire extinguisher and shattered it. I hope you have money to pay for it. Made a lot of folks very mad." "I'm terribly sorry," Sylvie said, stroking Gruder's desiccated fingers, his sobbing shoulders. He was trying to help. Sylvie called her grandmother and explained what had happened. In the end, Grandma didn't take Gruder back. Though he did not realize it, Gruder had checked into Bethlehem Retirement, and he would not leave. Sylvie tried to visit at first. He wasn't the same. In the small room on the pills, Gruder's lips were dry, his words terse, his limbs still. She thanked him, though, for helping with her infestation. She couldn't be sure he heard. She left him there, and months later, she got a call when he died. At night, it was silent in the house. Sylvie could only fall asleep with the TV on, cooking shows mostly. She wished, silently, for the days before the Hazy life diagram. She wished for days when she could believe, floating hazily somewhere out there, her uncle's spirit lived on, might return to her, haunt her, accuse her. But he didn't. She sat in an empty apartment, falling asleep to cooking shows, and felt no comfort knowing she would never hear the man's smacking lips and queasy demeanor ever again.
The story